I am an avid hiker, and when I can't make the hour-plus long drives up to the mountains, I enjoy the nice hikes near my home. This one particular hike near my home is 5 miles in many different directions, like a Goosebumps book of sorts for hiking. You can only see the trees and the greenery on one hike, or a massive waterfall on another, follow the river on another, see the abandoned and dilapidated mills from decades ago, etc. I went to the waterfall this time. I was about 2.5 miles in and I sat down and did some work, enjoying the serenity. When I was ready to leave, I looked around and saw a family, a father, a mother, and 3 kids near me. I packed my things back in my day pack as they left. I am a major people hater. I prefer to hike in areas where there are no people for miles. I chose to go a different way back to the trailhead than the way I came because I didn't want to run into this family for the next 2.5 miles. I checked my map on my cell phone and found a route that I could take back that seemed remote enough. I immediately noticed that this trail was not man-made, but just probably what was left after some flooding. It was going upriver away from the waterfall, and I was so close to the river. All I had to do was walk out onto a bent tree and I could touch the water. It was a very thin trail, not big enough for people to walk side by side, and it was covered in thick roots. I enjoyed this and it was peaceful. I passed some girls who had hooked up hammocks to read in about 20 feet to my right after I had hiked this little path for a while, and I had nothing but the sound of the slow-flowing river to my left, until I heard lots of footsteps coming from behind me. I didn't want to deal with the people behind me, so I stepped out onto a tree that hung over the river and waited for them to pass. It was that dang family from the waterfall. I could have sworn that they went the complete opposite direction, but whatever. I waited a few minutes before I started walking again. I did not want to run into them. Pretty soon, their voices disappeared in the distance, and I was able to go back to enjoying the peace and beauty around me. I hiked for another 5 or so minutes when I had to turn a sharp corner around a boulder at a major bend in the river. This man, the father, was standing there on the other side, crouched down, like he wanted to scare me. I screamed and he laughed. I got really angry and I noticed that his family were nowhere near us. I yelled, "What the heck is wrong with you?" at him, not bothering to control my anger being snuck up on by some stupid human. But he wouldn't stop laughing. I realized that I was dealing with an idiot or a psychopath and I didn't want to deal with either. So I turned around and I booked it. I could hear him behind me, following me. He wasn't a very big man. He stood about 5'6" and was around 180 to 200 pounds. But he was keeping pace about 20 feet behind me. Let me tell you that this path is not for running. I very nearly went sideways into the river a few times, but this gave me a few ideas too. The routes that I could mostly handle. I knew the terrain in the park pretty well. As long as I focused on my quickly placed steps around the thick root systems and keeping my balance, I could make it. I was running backwards towards the waterfall, downriver, where surely there would be people around. It was a straight shot. But then, I remembered the hammock girls and I remembered that they were slightly hidden and if I picked up the speed, dude behind me would miss me turning because of the natural curves of this path. I sprinted on the trail and I burst into the hammock girls area. I sputtered out a quick and quiet explanation. A man following me, and they hid me behind the lowest hammock. Took us 5 to 10 seconds max to set up, and the 3 of us watched as this guy ran past not long after I was safely hidden. I stayed with the girls for another few minutes just to be safe, explaining the situation, catching my breath, and then went back the way that I came from, upriver. I did not want to run into this dude again. Oh, but you think this is over? No. As I again hiked upriver on the trail, my original remote path back to the trailhead, I tried to calm myself down. I just couldn't get my mind to stop thinking that I was being followed. I just tried to hurry and get out of there as fast as I could. I turned a sharp right at the boulder that the man was hiding behind before, and kept pushing through the rough trail. I tried to focus on the sound of the river that was still to my left, but I couldn't get the sound of my heart out of my ears. And then crunching. The sound of my pounding heart morphed into the sound of footsteps in an instant. I realized that I was being followed again. I looked back and guess who? This dang father again. I got mad as hell. I stopped and turned around. I yelled at him to stop following me, and I screamed bloody murder at him. I yelled profanities at him. I threw a dang pine cone at him. He smiled a toothy grin and kept walking slowly towards me as it bounced off his shoulder. He wasn't fazed by any of it. He just kept smiling as if we were an old friend. What he did not know is that I am an Army combat veteran and a domestic violence survivor. I have PTSD from both, and I have skills that many don't have. Dude chose the wrong girl to mess with that day. I had had enough. I already hate people enough, but this guy was just crossing a million lines into my freaking territory. So I charged at him. He finally wiped that stupid look off his face. I was seeing red at that point because I will not be made to feel unsafe in the only place I've felt safe since I've got divorced or went to war. Forget that dude. Seriously, F that dude. I ran directly at him and knocked him down with the full force of my body crashing into him. I screamed at him as I hit him blindly. I grabbed his hair in the waistband of the back of his pants and started dragging him to the edge of the trail. He was the one yelling at me this time. Every time he fought back, I gave him a swift kick. I gave him several explanations for why his behavior was so stupid, and then I unceremoniously kick-pushed him into the river. I told him to cool off in the water and to not come out until I was long gone. I turned back in the direction that I had been walking before and decided that I needed to take another detour, just to be safe from getting away from him, and also to get the F away from people. I knew there was a trail parallelish to the one that I was on to my right, and I looked around for a clear place to climb up the steep hill, which was mostly granite and moss and ivy. I hadn't planned on impromptu rock climbing that day, but whatever. I found a spot and started climbing until I got scared of my wits again by three guys just sitting in the middle of this hill on a very small mossy flat spot smoking weed. They were completely hidden. Once I caught my breath again from the shock and the climbing, I asked if they had heard me screaming and they said that they did, but that they thought that I had it covered. I rolled my eyes and told them to kick anyone down the hill that tried to follow me, and I continued on. Freaking stoners, man. It took me a while to cover the 2.5 miles back to the trailhead that day, because I kept looking back, taking detours, hiding randomly. But when I did, I called the cops and alerted the park ranger about the guy. I don't know any other details on that. The cop laughed and said, "Hey, good for you," when I told him what I did. I honestly doubt they did much because I never heard back. I haven't been back to that place since, sadly. I just want to state before I post this that I don't agree with any violence, but it was getting out of hand there without it. I just wanted to hike in peace, and I would absolutely prefer if I could do it alone and safely. Also, thanks Cheez-Its for those hammock girls. Also, +1, if that man was you, F off, you creep. A few months back, my girlfriend and I were bored hanging around the house and spontaneously decided to go for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appealed to both of us. And even though there was only about an hour of daylight left, we figured we had enough time to go enjoy a hike before it got too dark. We quickly filled up our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes we had, and we were out the door, driving up into the mountains. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go up in the mountains. We tended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking. But we wanted to change things up and regressed further up the mountain road to a trail a friend of mine had mentioned. We kept in mind our time and figured that we could hike for a bit and simply enjoy the nice environment around us, and finish up before it was too late. We arrived at the trailhead and see that there were no cars left along the road, where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we continued on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill that then recoups the elevation at the bottom, with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top and then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off the trail a ways off and some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with that coyote lurking around, and she playfully hit me for that one. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large fallen tree that made a bridge over a dried riverbed, and I decided to take a rest and climb around on it and take pictures. We're there for about 10 minutes and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance until she hears a rustle in the trees behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumed size of whatever made that rustling, but continue on only briefly before she decides she's done and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her and we turn around to head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my loose laces, and looked behind us for the first time on the hike. It's uncharacteristic of me, but hey, I was having fun, why be paranoid? I see a person dressed entirely in black with their hood on, that was a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. It wasn't something out of the ordinary. So, what if they're wearing black with their hood on? I wear black most of the time and it's cold out. I shouldn't make assumptions. This does trigger me to be more alert, however, and I inform my girlfriend of this person's presence. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace, and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final bend of the section, I figure they're far behind us and that there's nothing to worry about. Sooner than later, the person is behind us again, but much closer. Probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before, and we had increased our speed, so this alarmed us. We briskly walk around another bend, and as soon as we come around it, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction on both of our parts, as we just started running without a word said to initiate it. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breath for a moment and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly halt a sprint upon noticing me looking back, as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point I shout, "Go!" and we sprint down the hill. What little light was left struggled to make its way through the dense trees surrounding us, and the steep hill proved challenging to run down without a clear path to be seen. We both stumbled down the hill, almost falling multiple times and slamming our feet onto rocks and loose brush, but we didn't fall and we didn't look behind us. We made it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill and then we will have made it out. We persevere up the incline and make it back to our car. I briefly breathe in relief as I start my car, heart pounding and adrenaline racing. As I reverse out onto the road, the person emerges at the trailhead, apparently breathing heavily. We finally get a glimpse of him. His hood had fallen off his head, exposing his pale complexion and dead eyes that were only illuminated by a single lantern at the start of the trail. He was holding something in his hand, but it was too dark to see and I was not interested in sticking around to make out the object. I shift into drive and accelerate as fast as my car could muster, leaving him behind in the dust of the empty side of the road. This happened last fall when the weather was cooling down but wasn't too cold. I was going through a breakup and having a rough time in life in general, and I was seeking ways to become more independent and grow myself. So, I decided to run to a park 30 minutes away from my city to enjoy the sunset. This was in November, so the park was almost completely empty. I passed 2 cars while driving in. One was empty, but I noticed that the second car I passed was parked in the parking lot, with the headlights on. I couldn't see how many people were inside, but I instantly got a bad feeling. Whatever I'd told myself, I was being silly and that I shouldn't let stupid fear prevent me from enjoying the sunset. So I drove all the way into the park and parked my car in the parking lot where the road ended. I still had a nasty feeling when I parked, but the sun was still up and it wasn't dark, and I just wanted to get out for 5 minutes and hike up the trail to sit outside. I told myself there was nothing to worry about and I didn't need to be suspicious unless the car followed me to the parking lot. I waited a couple of minutes and nothing happened, so I left my car and I headed up the trail. I honest to God didn't go that far. I walked for maybe 2 minutes up to a bench at an overlook and sat for 5 or 10 minutes. It started to get a little bit darker since the sun had gone down. Think like early dusk. And so I turned around and I walked the 2 minutes back down the path to the parking lot. There was a little bend in the path before it got to the lot, and as soon as I rounded the bend, my stomach fell. The car was sitting between the trailhead and my car. I can't even describe just how terrifying that feeling was. I knew something was wrong in that very moment. I called my mom and then I called the police and asked them to come to my car because I didn't feel safe returning to my car alone. For reference, I am a short and skinny girl. After speaking to the police officer, I called my mom again and stayed on the phone with her for 30 minutes waiting up the trail for an officer. Those minutes were some of the most dreadful minutes I'd ever experienced. It was a park, so there were coyotes howling nearby, and an owl. It was getting darker every second, and I was just staring down the path, waiting for whoever was in the car to decide to come looking for me. After what felt like an eternity, an officer finally arrived. I saw his lights and finally headed back down the trail to my car. Sure enough, there was a man sitting in the driver's side of the car in the lot. The officer told me the man was just sleeping, but I'm not so sure. I passed his car while I was driving and he followed my car to the parking lot that I was in. There were plenty of empty lots to sleep in. If somebody decided to sleep in their car in a park, which I think is illegal anyway, I don't think they would choose to park right next to another car. Not to mention, I had only been away from my car for maybe 15 minutes at the most, and he had parked between the trailhead and my car. So he would see me return to my car and I would have to pass him before I could get into my vehicle. The whole situation scared me from ever going to the park alone again. So, stranger in the woods, please, let's not meet.